if you're a builder that's wanting to know about the struggles that other builders come across with managing their project financials, this is the episode for you. Today, I am joined with Nathan Marsala from Bison Group in Salt Lake City, Utah, where we go deep in terms of what does it take to start managing a project's financials successfully from the very beginning. Took a little bit of a spin, not totally the direction I thought it was going to go, but it's massively interesting in terms of Nathan's perspective on managing the document control component in the pre-con stage, having very strong subcontractor relations, and then wrapping all that up into very thorough and consistent communication with customers, sub-trades, everybody involved. Go ahead and pop in. We'll get going. And here we are. Nathan Marsala, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good, dude. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today. Where we'll be focusing is the struggles that builders come across when managing their project financials. Does it ever happen? What's your take?
Builders struggling with finances on projects? Never.
Correct.
It's never happened in the history of mankind. No.
All right. The world's shortest podcast. Here we are, folks. Thanks for tuning in. It was a good episode.
Builders are perfect at managing their money and other people's money. So
that's right. That's right. And it's a business where very little of that happens. It's a very, very small volume going back and forth.
Exactly.
Obviously, we're being facetious. Facetious? Sarcastic? Probably both. Both. But no, Nathan, I appreciate you coming on all the way from Utah. Go ahead and give the listeners just a quick background on yourself, how you got into the game, a little bit about the Bison Group story.
Yeah. So, I got into the game because I was born. My dad's a builder.
As every builder.
Yeah. So, I grew up on job sites. There's photos of me 2 years old running around with Senko nailers and, people would make me tool belts out of old jeans when I was little. Always thought I'd be an architect instead of a contractor. Played architect a lot growing up as a kid. That's where I initially went to school for and geared all of my schooling towards originally. But, growing up in the house that we did, you always worked on job sites. By 13, I had to learn a trade and a skill. Carpentry was where I started, and that's where I cut my teeth. I was a carpenter, primarily a finished carpenter as I put myself through college. Like I said, I wanted to be an architect, and that's what I geared all my education towards. I got to a point where I said, you know what? This is not what I want to do. I don't want to be trapped behind a screen and a desk all day, every day inside, which ironically, I do more of that than I would like to admit. And therefore, started into the construction management with my degree. I've worked on the commercial side for some of the large, billion-dollar brands that are out there on the commercial side doing some pretty cool projects and running lots of neat things in different styles from, ground up to public works to, higher end occupied spaces. And then, but always had residential as a background and had done a lot with residential, built in a couple different states. And then, long story short, to speed it up, I've been in this zone before with high-end residential as well as high-end commercial. I spent a portion of my career in the owner's rep land, working for a large multi-billion-dollar corporation, overseeing all of their construction projects, and that was hiring architects, general contractors, being responsible for dates, completions, and that whole scale, and then putting numbers together and seeing the performance and the business side of that on the on the investor owner side of the relationship. But I love where I'm at, and so we started the Bison Group because I really wanted to get back to my roots and really focus on the high end residential. That's residential in general has, I think, a lot of room for improvement in the deliverable and the process that is delivered to a client. So end of the day,
Love it.
Started this, and where we are, we're based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. We work on what we call the Wasatch Front and the Wasatch Back. So the Wasatch Back, people will know of Park City, Heber, Midway, kind of those fun ski vacation destination spots. So we work both sides of the Wasatch, and we primarily build finely crafted homes that are bespoke for discerning clients.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, and that's why I wanted you on today's episode to talk about the struggles that builders come across with tracking project financials, because as you just put, you've really seen it at just about every level, right? And was your dad was a builder?
Yeah, still is.
How big of an It still is. Okay.
Yeah, he now works for us.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, so what was the size of his business? Like when you were working there, was he a big builder? Was he always like kind of small, like family business owned? What?
It kind of bridged both. Mostly, one thing I learned from him a lot was efficiencies, how to run
Hmm.
large projects in a much leaner fashion. I mean,
Hmm.
he'd done these, 250,000 square foot, 5-story, tens of millions of dollars
What?
historic renovations of projects with
Not a small
small,
builder.
not
Not a small builder.
well. You could say that the project size and volume wasn't small, but the team that he ran for his business was actually pretty bloody lean and small. Um,
Yeah,
and that's where kind of it bleeds into what we're talking about today, right? It's systems, it's processes, it's organization, and it's know-how, and it's not complicated on the know-how. It mostly comes down to the discipline of the doing.
sure.
We've all talked probably extensive at length with people about, hey, you know what? If knowledge was everything, we'd all have six packs and be billionaires. But there's also a
Right.
execution part, right?
Totally.
There's a lot of people that think
Totally.
they have it, but they either lack the discipline or just don't want to do it, or they get distracted. And don't get me wrong, like we're not perfect. We don't execute on everything the way we want to, and
Right.
there are things that at the end of the day didn't get done that needed to get done because
Right.
there's also a lot of things that happen. But you have to know what your priorities are and what you need to execute first and foremost. And that kind of comes back to what we're
Totally.
talking about, right? If you can get those basics down, you can do a lot more with fewer people.
Let's talk about the basics because that's typically where discipline starts. What are some of the basics that you see a lot of builders, or even as you were growing through your career, getting done or not getting done well?
Identifying what the basics are. Like, I mean, you asked the question, like, what are the basics that people don't get? They don't even think about it. Like, let's just start right there.
Okay.
First and foremost,
Where should people be thinking?
it's
In your opinion, of course.
well, I think it starts in multiple spots. There's not necessarily like one primary do this, then that, then that. There are things that have some overlap in there. But I'd
Sure.
say the first things first, you can't build if you don't understand what the vision is. And so it starts with a good, strong foundation in the construction documents, the drawings, right? A lot of people move forward with drawings that are not where they need to be. And I
Mhm.
understand the cash flow concept. I understand the pressure from hitting a completion date or a start date for a client. We all deal with that. And, but there has to be a conversation with these drawings are not complete. They are inadequate. Let's set a date. Let's get them correct. Because if you don't know what's in there, that is going to cost you time and money on the back end. That's heartache. That's heartburn. So, number one, making sure that the drawings and the documents are dialed in to the level that they should be. A lot of times they're not, and they're always lacking, and it ends up on a builder's shoulders to go fill in the gaps. Now,
Totally.
we can have a whole different conversation whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, but that's part of it. Number one. Number two, do you have a strong group of trade partners that you're working with that are properly qualified for the work? You can get guys in there that, hey, you might like, he might be your buddy, but if he's not showing up on time, hitting the dates or the numbers that he's given you, or he's missing scope, or his quality is not executing at the level that you sold it, you're only hurting yourself because the client's going to be frustrated and it's going to have the project suffer. So there's a couple things, just right off the bat, you have to have good
Yeah.
relationships with good trade partners that are qualified for the work. You have to have good, solid drawings in place. And then you have to be able to communicate.
Mhm.
Right. So if you have good drawings, you have strong communication skills that are, written, verbal, they're clear, clean, effective, and you got good trade partners, you're going to be off to a good start. But that communication is going to cross many other buckets to make a project successful, whether it's errors, challenges, schedule, all of these things are part of the communication process.
Totally. Okay, so even just like the first step is like strong document control and having a very well articulated, well completed set of plans and construction documents. What happens if you don't? Like, even just give me some examples of maybe some things that you ran into as you were building this thesis. What are some of the challenges that builders would come across if they don't have that piece aced?
Okay. So let's just define what a strong set of documents look like, right? So
Mhm.
We don't need to get into everything. We've had reels on our Instagram about, you know, what some of the weak sets look like, and they're a handful of pages versus the strong sets that are, hitting 100 pages plus in documentation. So your construction documents, your drawings, plan specifications, those are a form of communication,
Communication.
right? So what did I just
Hmm.
talk about? That there's three big things. You need awesome drawings, you need a good solid trade base, and you need strong communication skills.
Hmm.
Well, you kind of look at drawings and communication, or they're kind of the same bloody thing, right? Because what the
Yeah.
drawings are doing is they're communicating the vision of
Yep.
what the end goal is supposed to be. So
Right.
if it's not clear, and here's some examples, right? We've had drawings that came out, and yeah, you want to help people, but you got floor plans, and you got a reflected ceiling plan that shows you the ceilings, but there's no internal wall elevations. So how do you know what the heck is
Hmm.
going on the wall? Like how do you know it shows cabinets there, but are they full height? Are they wall height? What's the look and
Hmm.
feel, right? There's no elevations. There, if
Sure.
or then you get stuff that have elevations, but they don't have finishes called out. Well,
Hmm.
okay, is that paint grade? Is it stain grade? Is it
Right.
blue? Is it red? Is it green? So when it's vague, you now have to go fill in the gaps. You got to go find the answers. You can
Hmm.
you can have a set of drawings that can just be bereft of information.
So I was actually at the Sunbelt Builder Show supporting our good friends down at the Texas Association of Builders. And I was talking to a speculative builder that it was actually along these lines, had a set of plans. He had an administrator in the office managing selections, and there was a communication breakdown. This individual had been discussing, it was like there was an island and there was, plumbing and electrical and gas, whatever. And
Right.
that was all in the plans. But then they went through the selections process and they moved stuff around. Well, that never got communicated to the owner. They had been ordering material and starting to prep everything for what was on the plan. And then everything started to show up, and they didn't have gas where they needed it. They didn't have water where they needed it. And that all fell on him to then tear everything out, get those subs back in to route everything where it needs to go. And I want to say it was like a 5-figure mess up. And that person ended up losing their job, and it was a whole thing. But what are some of those like nightmare stories that you hear? And again, like a more tactical, what does that look like? I mean, do you bridge the gap between like a selections coordinator and the office owner? Is this just tight communication document? What is that? How do you prevent that from happening?
Get the right team on board up front. So
Yeah.
when we've been brought in two different scenarios, right? We're brought in on a scenario where the owner wants to work with us and they want to work with a specific architect, and we don't have a say or a choice in that.
Hmm.
And then it's our job as the builder to make sure that the design team is completing everything correctly and appropriately that they need to.
Hmm.
And if they're not drawing it and no one's saying anything, whose fault is that? If we
Right.
know we need the information, it needs to be drawn or specified, then we need to speak up and kind of raise our hands. Now, the other situation is they come to us and ask us for the recommendation, and we're only going to recommend architects and design teams that we have a stronger history with. Doesn't mean we
Hmm.
wouldn't recommend somebody new, but we need to know a lot about them first. What do their drawings and their documents look like? There's a certain level of just like base documentation, right? Are there proper schedules for plumbing schedules, light fixture schedules, appliance schedules, equipment schedules for mechanical, electrical? Like all of that needs to be known up front. Do they
Hmm.
do interior elevations? Do they do
Hmm.
reflected ceiling plans? Do they do wall sections and more detail sections, or is it just a basic permit set, which is missing just about everything that is really pertinent to understanding the final scope and vision for the client? Now, it's
Hmm.
important that everybody goes and pulls all of that information in, but you know, not to throw designers under the bus because I don't think it's 100% on them.
Hmm.
A lot of times their fee only has so many hours, right? Or it only covers so many
Sure.
drawings. And sometimes that's literally coming down to the client and the owner or these owners that have come accustomed to they don't want to pay X dollars for the professional to do the full scope of work. But
Hmm.
what they're not realizing is that they leave a lot of additional money that will be phantom and will be spent and it's going to bite them down the road because they just
Totally.
they chose not to spend the money up front and invest it where they needed to have the expert fully draw and advise on everything. So us, the builder, could know everything up front, right? So some tangible examples. Boy, I don't even know where to start. There's over 20 years of
Just throw it
some
at
of
the
these
dartboard.
issues. Simple. We've had, items where, everything was roughed in for, a traditional sink on a vanity.
Right.
And then, next thing you know, everything, we asked the questions. We said, no, it's normal. It's normal. It's typical. Okay, we did typical rough in. And then they decided that they wanted this more, open floating counter, which means all the plumbing below is exposed, which means our rough would be slightly different, not much different. But, then all of a sudden the stuff that they showed up with, didn't work
Right.
at all, because all of a sudden they gave us a wall mount faucet, not a deck mount. And it's like, well, nowhere was this ever like communicated or shown. We asked questions.
Right.
We were told it was just a standard, single hole faucet, and it turns out it's a single hole faucet that comes out of a wall. We've also had stuff where we were provided, light fixtures. We were given images, and we needed to know all the roughing information. And the light fixtures were not supplied or by us in any way, shape, or form, or specified. So we asked the design team that was really closely guarding that they wanted all that information. So we need cut sheets. We need to know all of this so we can get our roughing correct and dimensions correct. And they gave us all of the information. And then when the light fixtures showed up, none of them fit on our rough end, and on the J boxes, they were incorrect, and we couldn't understand why. And then as we looked at the cut sheets and we looked at the light fixtures, the aesthetic looked the same, but the fixtures were actually not even the same manufacturer. And the cut sheets that they provided us didn't match. And when we said, hey guys, what's going on? Like, we have a big issue here. They said, oh, well, we didn't know the actual cut sheet. We couldn't find it, but this one looked like that one on a Google image search. So that's what we used.
Brutal. Okay. So this was a breakdown between, customer designer, and then a breakdown of communication from designer to you guys.
Some of those are. Yeah. Some of it, they've made a decision and no one told the builder downstream. Or sometimes it's incorrect in the drawings, or sometimes it's not there at all. And then people show up with stuff. So, like for us, we'll just say this. These are some of the lessons that were learned a long, long time ago.
Of
they don't
course.
happen on our projects much at all anymore.
Of
primarily
course.
Because, I'm sorry, unless you are a very select few designers and architects that we work with and have a relationship with, you're not providing anything on our project. And that goes for our clients too. I know some of them want to. Every once in a while they can, depending on specifically what it is after a conversation. But if it's going to be purchased and installed anywhere on that project, we want to control that, because we need to make sure we've checked the boxes appropriately. And we can do that best with our trades and our submittal processes to make sure that we are all on the same page, that everybody's reviewed it, approved it, signed off on it. And then we can move forward with procurement. Now that's the shop drawings, that's the appliances, that's any plumbing fixture, window, you name it, door hardware, etc. Everybody sees it. Everybody sees the cut sheets. Everybody knows what it is. Everybody signs off on it first. Then it's ordered. And you can run into problems when it's not there. But the bigger problem is, there are things where none of it is ever drawn. None of it is ever called out in the drawings. And the client has a vision in their mind of what this is going to look like. But the documents don't actually ever provide that image. And therefore, you have people not guessing, but they're like, well, this is what we've done 1,000 times. This is what this normally means in the drawings, except for this one occasion that it isn't communicated in the drawings or the documents that that's what it's supposed to be.
Let's talk about that, because I think that's so we've obviously covered like document control, comms, great examples around how to mitigate that, and some horror stories that you guys have rebounded from and obviously learned and now applying processes around to mitigate in your business today. But I hear that a lot, and especially I hear even like custom home builders dreaming of getting into like more of a speculative world to cut out that customer communication concept. Now, how do you guys manage those expectations of customers coming in? Obviously, they're building beautiful homes, but when they start getting draws, they start getting invoiced for the work that's been performed, and they start going through that process, they probably start stutter stepping a little bit. Where do we cut? Where do we do this? How do you, as a premium builder, communicate the value of your very thoroughly vetted subs performing a very premium work to prevent these types of hiccups.
I mean, you use the word communication. It has to
Yeah.
happen early and often. So most of our projects, we are not coming in at the end of the drawing process. We are there before pen has ever hit paper with the architect
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
over 90% of all of our projects. We are there through the entire design phase. We don't do free bids and estimates because there's a lot of hours and energy that go into understanding a project properly for what the cost is. We always enter into a pre-construction agreement with the client. It's not free. There is a substantial cost to that because we put a substantial amount of work into it and there's a substantial amount of value that is exchanged in return, and it puts both parties skin in the game. Now, we are there during design meetings, not all, but many, especially anything
Hmm.
that is important from a design meeting. We're working on preliminary schedules. Like you get a schematic design, we're going to give you a schematic schedule that goes and a schematic budget that goes with that schematic design. And as those
Hmm.
drawings evolve, we're having those conversations again and again and again. Now, this does a couple things. It's like bowling, right? You can bowl and you've got the gutter on the left and the gutter on the right. And you can bowl a gutter ball and never knock a pin down.
Right.
At the very, very beginning of the project, we put the bumpers up on both sides. You're pretty
Hmm.
much guaranteed to knock some pins down when you're going to do that
Hmm.
right off the bat. Number one, you can't be afraid to ask the right questions and the tough questions, which is how much money are you willing to spend on this project, and how much money is too much money. You have to know what the
Hmm.
guardrails are up front. You're going to
Hmm.
knock some pins down right off the bat, and you never end up at that point, hopefully, specifying things that are, oh my gosh, would love to have it, but now I feel bummed that I can't because it put us over our budget. You can try and avoid those right off the bat if you get the budget conversation properly handled up front. The second thing is you got to be detailed and thorough on what that is so people can make actionable decisions during the design process. Sometimes
Hmm.
we've seen some of these conceptual numbers come out and it's, 8 or 9 line items broken down into, structure, exterior envelope, cabinet package, interior finishes package, uh, you know, landscape. And they're big
Sure.
buckets, right? Now, granted, there's not a
Right.
lot of information. Can
Right.
you get more granular than that? Absolutely, because we do. And we know it takes time and energy, but that's also why it's not free. But what we're trying to
Right.
give somebody is how do they make an actionable decision early on to make sure when that bowling ball is going down the lane, it can bounce off the bumpers and knock more pins down. And so when, by the time you get to final drawings, your final bid set, construction set, you're bowling strikes at that point, right?
Right.
You're knocking the
Right.
pins down and you don't need the bumpers because when the project is live, you're under contract, you're building, the money's real, it's getting spent. There are no bumpers and you don't want to
Right.
bowl a gutter ball, but you've had all that practice, right? You've
Right.
been knocking pins down. You know what it looks like. So for us, it's having those conversations throughout the design, throughout pre-construction, and setting the precedent up front. And it also means
Hmm.
the vision. If we don't understand something as a builder, then we can't build it. If
Right.
it's unclear to us, it's most likely going to be unclear to our trades because we're the ones responsible to help communicate that to the trades and ensure that it is, built accordingly to meet that vision. So if we're not the ones raising our hand saying, "Hey, over here," like, "No, I can't do that. I don't understand that." Who else is going to do that? The client might think that they have it understood. The number of times that you'll see, and this happens, we talk about in elementary school, we talk about high school, college, etc. Right? If you have a question, raise your hand. Please don't be embarrassed. If you have that question, everybody else has that question. You're not alone. Like we hear that all the time, and
Right.
then still nobody raises their hand. You can sit in a room around the table with your clients, the design team, your build team, and build team, not all your trades, right? Like maybe you and your
Yeah.
pre-con guy,
PMs, whatever.
and
Yeah.
so
Pre-con.
there might be 6 or 7 of you in that room. And we could say, I don't fully understand what's going on right here. Can you explain this to me? And as they start going down, oh, well, it's actually supposed to be like this, and we intersect here. And then all of a sudden the client goes, oh, I didn't know it did that. Right? They're
There
too,
we go.
they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to
Right.
admit that they don't fully understand the vision that's being presented because, a lot of times designers are very happy and they're excited to show the vision and everybody's got the enthusiasm. Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But they're like, I don't know what that really looks like in the end. The number
Right.
of we see it all the time where something we're coming across like, hey, does the client know we're doing it this way? Yeah, yeah, they do. Then you talk to the client like, I didn't know that. That's news to
Right.
me. So it's important to make sure you're having these conversations. We like to do a page turn meeting with everybody where we're going through all the details, right? Every page.
Hmm.
What is it on this
Yeah.
page? What is the question? What does it look like? What's the vision? Those are important things to have. Now, some of those need to happen between the designer and the client, whether we're present or not. And we encourage every, client and homeowner, like if you don't understand something or you don't feel like you've seen enough in the drawings or the documents, like ask for more, ask for clarification, because a picture is truly worth 1,000 words. And in our business, we're not building off of descriptions and words. We're not reading novels and reconstructing. We're using plans. We're using
Right.
pictures, right? That's nothing. That's all it is. It's a graphical representation with some text saying this is what it is. This is what it's supposed to look like, and
Right.
roughly these locations. So, and sometimes it's not roughly these locations; it's exactly these locations. So, it's being specific, and it comes back to the communication.
Yeah. Well, and it's not always just a picture's worth 1,000 words. So a picture can be worth $1,000 and sometimes in the negative if we don't have those conversations. Right.
Mhm.
And that's where I think even when you do start breaking it down again from the document control, subcontractor control, which I do want to get into, and then it's all kind of being umbrellaed with strong communication, it's worth it to have the strong pre-con side of the project. It's worth to cover these buckets because you start getting into tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in issues if you don't. I mean, what are some
Mhm.
of the biggest losses that you guys have seen in the early days, of course,
No, I mean,
of
it's not
not
even in the
having these
early
process?
days. We had one last year where the client didn't understand the vision. It was very clearly communicated. There were renderings, there were everything, but
Right.
they hadn't fully made up their mind, and they changed their mind, substantially on multiple occasions. Um,
Yeah.
that led to lots and lots of rework. I mean, that was a $500,000.
Jeez. Half a million. And was that issued in the form of change orders
Yeah,
or
those were all owner initiated change orders because they they
okay,
they,
so
they didn't
even
understand their vision. Um,
sure.
I mean, there were things that were fully mocked up in
Right.
person, 3D, right?
Right.
Full images, full renderings. Um, and then once it was up, they're like, you know what? That actually isn't what I thought it was going to be. And uh,
We want
we,
it to
we,
look
we,
this
we
way.
need to change it. It needs to be
Yeah.
more like this over there. And you can't always help that. And that might be a unique
Right.
situation. But look,
Right.
we've had two. We were on a project. This was a number of years ago in the teens.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a commercial. So it's a slightly different animal. But I mean, it was a 50,000 square foot project. It was the number's not fully disclosed, but it was well over 10 million. And
Yeah.
we were into finishes. Now, mind you, the owner and everybody had been present. Same process, submittals,
Right.
samples approved by everybody. The
Right.
clients approved it, the architects approved it. We have weekly meetings. We're walking, we're talking. Everybody knows it. Finishes start going, and the owner's just like, stop. This isn't us. This isn't what we want. I don't understand it. Now, at least they had the courage to say stop. But I mean, we had, you know, bathrooms and sections that were fully tiled. We tore it all out, started over. We had one spot. I mean, we were 85% of the way there. We were weeks away from, some of the carpets, which are some of the last things that we do on some of those coming in. And we went backwards, demoed it down to studs,
Oh my
took
god, the
walls
whole
up.
thing?
Yeah. I mean, there were spots that were so far
Or
along that we like, and part of it was they just realized, hey, this isn't the vision that we thought we were getting. It's somehow we missed the boat and we need to change course.
right.
And, there was a cost that was substantial to that, not just in financial, but in time. I mean, it added a solid 6, 7 months.
That's insane.
And you add 7 months of, you know, contractor project management,
Right.
delays, luckily it wasn't there was no like real like lost revenue because they were, productive in all their spots. They already owned the building, but it adds up. There's soft costs that definitely that stack up on that hard. But that's what
S
happens when you don't fully understand the vision that's being communicated, or and like in all fairness, both of those had solid drawings and had
yeah.
solid processes with that were managed and instituted not just by us but by the design teams and the architects, and like everything had been signed off, everything had been approved. And at the end of the day, the client was like, you know what, maybe I just didn't fully understand what I was approving and what I was seeing, and it's not us, and we need to make a change. And that
Right.
going to happen. It's going to happen in It's not always, but sometimes it can be extreme. Most of the time, it's minor. But where it is extreme and where it's unexpected and where you get hard feelings is when
Mhm.
things happen, but there were no drawings, right? This happens most of the time, not when there's good systems and processes, but when there's a lack of information in the set of drawings and the builder's
Sure.
building off of what he thinks is supposed to be there because that's what the architect thinks was supposed to be there, but that's not the
Totally.
vision that the client ever had. Or sometimes it's not the vision the architect had, but they didn't draw it, they didn't communicate it, and the builder's just moving forward. So we do have a responsibility on our side to make sure we're asking the questions that have to be asked, and they're not always getting asked, and they're not always
Right.
getting answered.
Well, and so even okay, and even to take it back to the project that you're talking about, what did that do? Like, how did you handle the additional 6, 7, 8 months that did from your current projects? Because I'm sitting here saying, like, you've got more projects coming, starting. You've got team allocated. Like, obviously, you're making money on this project because it was up to their decision to come through in the form of change orders and whatever it might be. But
Yeah, but you don't.
how did you
Yeah, no,
go
I
ahead?
understand where you're going. You don't actually make as much money. I'll just stop you right there on these
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
extraordinary
Yeah.
some of these big change orders. You can make money on this project. That type of a change was meant we went into a cost plus method on that. So we're getting compensated for our time and some overhead and profit. But you know, you guys are on the financial side. You look at numbers.
Right.
That's what adaptive does. Um,
Right.
Time is money, not just in the sense of you know we're getting paid for our time, but if we project a project's going to take 14 months and it takes us 18, even though we're getting
Yeah.
paid to be there for the 18 months on the project management in a cost plus method,
Right.
if we anticipated, you know, say the cost of the work doesn't change much outside of a couple variables, but we had our timing way off. Number one, the margin we projected to make in a 14-month window and we just
Just
got we now we made it in an 18 or 19-month window. So our margins off, right? The
right.
starting the next project, getting to the next one. So then there's an opportunity cost that's additionally missed, right? If you do 5 projects per year and 2 go long, so all of a sudden you're doing 3 per year, that's 2 projects of, complete revenue that's missed. So in like that example, we got stretched really, really thin
Yeah.
because all this, I mean, we did have some other contracts. Some of them were actually for that client. And
Okay.
so they were a bit more understanding. But no, it changes your revenue projections. It changes your manpower. It changes your opportunity cost. Um, and that's the thing that sometimes gets lost in the sense of you could make X dollars in overhead and profit on a project. And we'll just use easy math, right? It's $1 million bill, 10%, you're going to make $100,000. Well, if you make that in uh, 10 months, that's 10 grand a
Right.
month, roughly, profit, averaged cash flow. Obviously, it has its ups and downs and it doesn't always pencil. It doesn't truly flatten pencil. This is just basic example, right? But
Mhm.
all of a sudden, if that takes you 18 months, you're not your average cash flow is $7,500 a month to cover your overhead.
Right.
Now you're down to
Well,
what, 7,500 a month? And if you go to 2 years, all of a sudden you're down to 5 grand a month. So you're making the same amount of money, but it's taking you twice as long or one and a half times as long. Therefore, you can't move on to other things.
so why like I just first thought, why don't you fire the client at that point? Obviously, you want more work on the back end. Is this like a brand thing and like
Yeah,
future
yeah, that
work?
one we had done a lot of work with that client. They were a repeat client.
Dang.
Look, they made it worth our while to stick through that.
Sure.
Like there was no reason to quit and walk away. And we're not going to quit and walk away in the middle of something like that because that doesn't look. You don't you can lose a lot more. I mean, have we fired clients? Yes.
Yeah.
Have we walked away from projects with pre-construction fee and just said, "Hey, we're going to give you your money back, and you know we're going to eat the cost because this isn't a right fit"? Yeah, we've done that.
Yeah.
Um,
But once you're in, you're in.
I mean, you can be, you can be. We try to be, um, but you can't always be. I mean, I think it really depends. I mean, you really have to go to an ultra extreme. I mean, we've had some projects that took, you know, a year and a half longer than we projected. They were double the timeline, and it was because the client changed the scope of work. They graciously compensated us for it. We went in to do project A. We ended up doing project B and C. And, B and C got really, this one overall project got really, really big.
Yeah.
And it turned out phenomenal. And we got, well compensated for our time and energy. I wouldn't change that, right? Sometimes
Sure.
it can be difficult, but that's also why we work for who we work for, and we focus on these high end residential projects. Everything we do is bespoke. Everything we do is,
Sure.
we are in the custom world, and the custom world means if they want to, rip out the brand new kitchen that they just installed because they absolutely decided it's not what they wanted and they saw something else that they really loved on their vacation
Yeah.
and they're willing to pay and compensate for it, then that's what we're going to do.
Sure.
Otherwise, we're a production builder. Or we go the
Totally.
model that you mentioned earlier. And yeah, there's a ton of chatter in the custom world of guys that are like, hey, I'm done with clients. Never want to work with
Right.
client. I'm just only going to build spec. And I'm not even going to market the spec until I'm done because I don't want anyone
Right.
changing anything. There's a lot of that. And a lot of that's due to COVID. People burned out
Hmm.
and they want a different model. And that's not us. We work
Yeah.
with the clients that want to change their mind. It's part of the
It's a
game.
part of it.
But we knew that going into it, right?
Right.
We know it's
Well,
going
and
to change.
that's what I was going to say is like how, like, so you're just forecasting almost like, do you forecast for these overages at a certain point, or is it just like when the client changes their mind, that's where you're just like kind of the oh shit moment of like, okay, well,
Hmm.
this is how it's going to impact the rest of it.
I mean, I wouldn't say we forecast for like some of these large, crazy changes. There's a contingency in our schedules for minor changes in time.
Sure.
Hiccups. Our schedules try to be as lean as possible because people just want to get done and we want to push a schedule.
Yeah.
So there's probably not as much contingency float from a time perspective in our schedules that could be there.
Hmm.
Dollar wise, we always carry a contingency that is a line item contingency. Depending on the project, there
Hmm.
may be 3 contingency line items: an owner contingency, a design contingency, and a contractor contingency. Now, the contractor contingency is what we control for, weird busts in scope or overages or unforeseen conditions, things like that. It's money we use at our discretion. What's not spent is credited back at the end and never billed for. Owner contingency is the owner's like, hey, I know I'm going to make some changes and I'm going to want
Hmm.
to bump some things up in here, in there, but I don't know what they are yet. And so we give them a bucket of money to draw on and against as part of their total forecasted cost. And then same thing, if it's early in the drawings, typically by the time you get to construction, the design contingency has been exhausted and gone and it's removed, right? But early on, you're going to carry a
Hmm.
design contingency because designers are going to select things. There's going to be some scope creep that are going to be outside of the allowances. And some of that's driven by the owner and some of it's not. And that's how you do that early on in pre-con. You carry more contingency. And once you get to construction, we have a financial contingency and everybody can track where that money went. Like it does move around. I've never had a project where we used zero contingency. There's always contingency. There's things that
Yeah.
pop up that, and it's designed to not have to go and feel like people are getting nickeled and dimed to death because of a $50 thing here or a, few $1,000 thing there. And it sounds, wow, a few $1,000. But I mean, mind you, the overall scope and scheme of the projects that we're doing and the,
Yeah.
the scale, it's very minor. The contingency
Decimals.
funds are yes, and are larger, but the definition and the communication of we have this contingency. It is at our discretion to use it. We have forecasted what your total cost is. If we're going to go over that, you're going to know. But
Mhm.
we need this to get across the finish line without us calling you constantly for little things, right? We can write the best contract in the world with the most dialed in scope of work, and there are still going to be things that crop up.
Totally.
I mean, we are all human beings. None of us are perfect. We're fallible. And, no drawing has ever been perfect and no site conditions ever been perfect. So things like that happen,
Totally.
whether it's weather or, there's a miscue on, in some embeds that accidentally got stuck in the wrong location because of a mental lapse in, for a microsecond. By the time they caught it, it was too late. And,
Hmm.
some of those things don't need to go back and forth, 100 times to get resolved. That actually costs more time and money.
Sure. Well, and how do you, and this is just the last topic, the sub control piece is obviously you've built up a big, well, let's actually start here. For the builders that don't have like a really solid group of subs, so they're still trying to find that threshold to get to the point of where you guys are, which is we don't work with designers or architects unless they're ours, or we don't work with these subs unless they're ours. How do you get to that point for them to be able to handle these types of situations and remain positive about performing work for you guys?
Part of it's just it's vetting them, it's interviewing them. Some of these guys only work in these types of spaces. That's where they've built their companies and brands around
Yeah.
too, right? So they get it. It doesn't mean it doesn't wear on people.
Right.
You talk to any stonemason, carpenter, framer that has put something up, they're very proud of the work. They took pride in what they did. They're a craftsman at heart. And somebody says tear it down and start over because they changed their
Yeah.
mind. Like that still stings. It's never fun,
Sure.
right? So, but you have to understand the temperament and the attitude of the owner and what you're building, and you have to make sure that that could be matched by trade partners. Have we fired trade partners? Yeah, even recently, as in 3 weeks ago.
Interesting.
They weren't the right fit. They were struggling with some of the attitude issues, with some of the execution issues. They weren't meeting the expectations. We had the conversations on corrective actions. It didn't work out. We had to cut them
Yeah.
loose. We had to terminate their contract and bring somebody else to complete the work. And we thought we had done a decent job at having them vetted. It's somebody that had chased us for years to want to do our work. At the end, they couldn't measure up. And there's nothing against them. I mean, our parting comment was, look, get more experience under your belt. Prove to us you are, who you think you're going to be in the future. And years down the road, when that time comes, give us a call and we'll come out and we'll take a look at what you're doing and we'll have another conversation.
Yeah.
But for now, the answer is no, you can't do our work. You have to be judicious about that. You have to be selective about who you're bringing onto these projects. Sometimes there are scopes of work that, there's a handful of people to pick from, period. And you've never worked with them before
Right.
because you've never done that before. So when it comes to that, you have to make time to go physically look at their work, talk to them, understand, what drives them, what motivates them to a certain degree. It's not all about, the warm fuzzies of they're motivated to do this, that, or the other. It's, number one, are they capable of doing the work? What is their reputation? Have you called their references? Have you physically looked at their work? And then, do they check all the typical paperwork boxes of the right insurances and things like that?
Yeah.
You're never going to give somebody a $500,000 contract that's never done a project over $50,000, right? That's too big of a jump for them.
Right.
You can help them
Right.
grow from the biggest contract they've had is a $50,000 one, and they're a small guy and they want to grow, and you think they check all the boxes, so you're going to give them a $60,000 contract, right? You have
Right.
to help them manage and grow responsibly when they're smaller and younger, and that's
Interesting.
true for you as a builder too. You can't go from doing. I mean, I've watched guys try to do it. I've watched guys do it, but you can and you can't, from a numbers perspective, go from a $500,000 project to a $3 million project. Okay.
Right.
The numbers on spreadsheets that's not that big of a deal, right? It's just more zeros, a couple more
Right.
places.
Right. Right.
The number of line items to manage might be substantially more. Typically it is.
Right.
Right. But the complexity typically comes along with it. On the other side is where guys get tripped up. Not always on the numbers, but on the complexity that comes with it, right? A 4,000 square foot project at, $2 million is vastly different than 13,000 square feet at $14 million.
Totally.
Right? They're completely different beasts and animals. And if you step too far too quickly, you can get swallowed up because you can have the systems and the processes, but it's what you don't know that bites you. And sometimes you have to step, small and slowly, and it takes a little bit more time and patience, and you have to play that long game. And so we do the same thing with our trades, right? And
Yeah.
it takes a long time to develop some of those relationships where you can do that. But we're always looking for new trades because guys are always retiring, or some guys that were great have lost a step and they're not great anymore, right? That's why we see, professional players retire, right? In their prime, they were the best, but they lost a step. They got old.
Right.
Sometimes it happens in the trades too. And it's not that guys are getting old. It's just companies change, cultures change. They got too big, and they went after more of the production and the volume play versus the quality play. And then we have to move on. So you're always looking, but you're always vetting. And it's an interview process. It's a lot of it's relationship, develop those relationships to get to know them and what they do.
Totally. Well, and I think, and just as like a finishing comment, I this was great in terms of the context and how you articulate, the struggles that builders have with running their project financials on a spin that candidly I wasn't anticipating, but massively valuable. And that's where I want you in terms of, because like our world over at Adaptive, the people that I talk to the majority of the time is, I mean, it's like the ones and zeros, like getting bills, categorizing bills, making sure that they're approved, getting them properly allocated, updated into budgets, and managing cash flow from that perspective. Where would you rank the document control, subcontractor controls, and communications falling in importance on properly managing project financials? One being the most important, five being the least important.
Let's rather than give a number, I'll give you a short answer, if that's okay. So,
Okay.
if you don't have solid documents,
Mm-hmm.
it's harder to manage the financials, right?
Sure.
So,
Totally.
the more information you have, the better your financials can be, because you can get a little bit more granular and you can make sure you've got actual numbers that actually cover the scope of work that's in the drawings, without surprises, without the unknowns, without the blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that nobody likes to have tough conversations. It's never fun.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's easier to talk about, hey, this did not ship on time, or this was discontinued, or we have a delay over here because, you know what, it's October and in Utah, everybody went on the elk hunt and there was just nobody to show up, because in our world, that's what contractors do.
Right.
Or it's 4th of July week and everybody's out of town, so it's going to be slow and there's a delay, right? Those things are easy conversations. They're not fun conversations, but they're easier conversation to have. The toughest
Right.
conversations for contractors to have, and this is my personal opinion and it's my experience, but it's what we see a lot. Contractors do not like to talk about money. Most people don't talk about money. How many husbands and wives talk about their financials at home, right? Personal finance is a disaster of a mess. That's why there's a whole industry around it, because people don't like to talk about money. They don't talk about investing. They don't talk about what they're, they hate the word budget. So if you can't have a conversation about money with your client because something costs more, or you missed something, or the forecast was off, you're going to have a very, very long project, and it's going to be a very, very hard project, because if you can't have that conversation, or you can't properly forecast, the pain that comes from that, because money's the personal part. And in the residential world on these custom homes, it's not a corporation's money. It's not shareholder money. It's their hard-earned money. This is their blood, sweat, dreams, and tears. Sometimes it's their retirement. They're putting a lot on the line. They have a ton of skin in the game. And the money is what can bring a project to a screeching halt. If you've got a budget of $1.4 million and the max you can spend is 1.5 because you had a contingency of $100,000 before you're like tapped out, maxed out, I can't afford this house anymore. And the contractor's not paying attention. And next thing you know, he's telling you it's going to cost 1.7. You just killed somebody's dreams. The project's going to get stopped.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up in some really tricky situations because you weren't paying attention to the drawings. Now comes back to the very, very, very beginning thing we talked about. You have to have a solid set of drawings, because it helps you forecast the numbers and get it right from day one before you break ground. Now, once you have that, all the changes, you got to have change order logs. You've got to be knowing that you've written contracts at a certain dollar amount. You're managing to that dollar amount, including like how many dumpster exchanges did you plan on? Like if you have a job site trailer, did you forecast enough time? Do you have enough man hours in there? Because you need to be forward looking and forecasting out. We do that every month. Okay, we have X amount of man hours left to manage this project between now and then. What does our forecast look like? Are we ahead of the curve, or are we behind the curve? If we're behind the curve, that means we're going to have to either do more with less or add money to the job. But if I can tell the client that 10 months out, when he getting all excited to add a hot tub towards the end of the project, I'm not going to surprise him with a $100,000 bill because we took too long and we had to charge more for this, this, and this. And he wouldn't have done the hot tub if he knew that. Right. Because they, mind you, everybody's got that in the back of their mind. I want to add this. I'm going to tweak this. But they're also operating off of the premise of the project only cost me X dollars, going back to the 1.4. Right. They've got 1.4 that they're spending. That's what they're committed to. They know they can go to 1.5. They're waiting for that right thing to add. Yep. That's the thing I want to add. But what they don't know is that you, the contractor, are sitting on $120,000 of change orders that you're too afraid to bring up, or you haven't
Yep.
managed your numbers and your line item cost properly. And so you don't actually know where you're at, and you're underbilled compared to where you're, and you're under forecasted where you're actually supposed to be at because you didn't manage your contracts and you didn't pay attention to all the notes from the subs on this was excluded. That's an addition. Oh, by the way, here's the change order. You said, yep, get it done. You didn't record it. And then all of a sudden you get surprised at the end and the client's going, whoa, I can't pay you because I did this change order. I would have never have done if I knew this is where I stood financially. So
Interesting.
I would say, I mean, it's absolutely vital and it's important to the success of any project because the relationship falls apart at the money more than the schedule with a client.
Right.
And the hardest conversation is about the money. And I know we're bumping up at time. I know you're looking at that clock in front of you. No, we're good.
No,
Okay.
we're good. I was going to add that this, I mean, to me, it sounds like the foundation of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it absolutely ludicrous to go into like trying to build someone's home without very solid, well articulated and outlined documents, subcontractor relations,
Because
and
if
incredible
that falls
communication.
apart, so if you don't have those, you're going to struggle to manage the cost and forecast the cost.
Yeah.
And that's where relationships
Yeah.
hurt the most, right? It's
Interesting.
the thing that you're from an incentive structure. It's the thing that people don't want to talk about, right? It's the thing they're afraid to talk about. It's the painful situation. You know, you get a phone call from a client, hey, or a text like, can we talk? First thing's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I mean, everybody's mind jumps to, they're going to cut the budget, or what?
Right.
It's a number, and people get afraid and they get scared, and that's a normal human reaction. But you have to have the difficult conversations, especially when it comes to money. It's never comfortable. I hate having them. I've never been comfortable like telling somebody, by the way, we told you this was a $6 million project, and we've
It's
had
gonna
some
be six,
unforeseen,
five,
and it's gonna
seven.
be 6.2, and they're like, man, I
Yeah.
really wanted to see this come in at 6. I'm like, yeah, man, we're pushing, we're fighting for every dime, but like
Yeah.
this is where we're at with changes that have been made or unexpected conditions, because sometimes you get into things that there's no way to forecast. We've had some that a quarter-mile long driveway in a massive lot that's 168 acres, right? You can do soils tests and we can do RTOs.
Yeah.
And you know what? Half the dig was perfect. And it's where a
Yeah.
lot of our soil samples were. And then we had a spot, wasn't good. And we had
Right.
to over-X the whole thing. And we had to bring
Yep.
in, engineered fill for roughly 6,000 square feet of this thing. And it was a big cost. Instantly, the number jumps.
Yeah.
It's outside of our control.
Wow.
It's outside of anything we could forecast or predict. It's outside of our excavator's control. The only thing you can do is tell the owner, like, hey, this is where we're at. This is the cost. Ball's in your court. Yeah. What can we do? And, that may mean we go take something else out of the project because it's early on to get their number back right. And it may be
Right.
no. But, at the same time, if you have a good job forecasting, they're willing to make those changes, right? We just had one. We've done a great job forecasting. We know where we're going to come in at. We're within, 2% of our original number, including with the owner changes and adds. And because of that, they're like, hey, let's go add a pool and let's go have fun. And that's what we just did. We're adding, so, to that's beneficial for us. We've extended that contract. It keeps guys busier a little bit longer. There's some profit in that for us. It extends the relationship. But part of that's because we also help them manage their cost, and we could forecast, and we could tell them accurately, yes, we're very confident this is where you're going to land in November when this thing is done. So they were willing to pull the, trigger on it and a multi 6-figure change order. And they're happy to do so versus, by the way, I can't pay you because you just told me I don't have them. You overspent. Now the house is not a gem that they're living in. It's a ball and chain.
Right. Totally. Well, and I think you're able to have those conversations because you've built the credibility by setting the expectation that you do on the front end.
Yeah.
You're able to move them down that path.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. No. So, managing the financials is paramount to the success of any project and the success of the relationship between you and the client long term.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the more difficult parts of a project, and it's not difficult in the sense that it's complicated, because it's not. It's addition and subtraction. There's just a lot of addition and a lot of subtraction that happens over a course of period of time. And this comes back to what we talked about, right? The discipline to just do the work and execute. Sometimes it's the boring, monotonous stuff. Like I mentioned, I don't like sitting in front of a screen all the time, but I sure spend a lot more time in front of a screen inside an office than I thought I would. But that's also
Totally.
the nature of the game. That's with where we are at Bison Group. That's part of my roles and responsibilities, and to make sure that the not just our clients' financials on their project are square, but that the company financials are square, so we can still be in business and still build. And you know that we
Right.
know where our margin is, we know what our operating costs are, we know what our burn rate is, and we know what we need to make on a project in order to be successful. Because in our mind, a successful job is everybody made money, everybody got along, and at the end, everybody wants to work together again. You know,
Totally.
client felt like they got a great value for what they paid. Sub made money, we made money, and everybody would like to go do it again in the future. That's a successful project.
I love it. This was great, Nathan. Where can builders find you?
We're on,
Instagram,
yeah, Instagram,
YouTube.
Bison Group, UT, um, Nathan Marsala on LinkedIn, bisongroupinc.com are probably the main go-to spots. You know, Instagram, typically on Wednesdays, we do a whiteboard Wednesday. We're talking about
That's
basically
right.
systems and processes, you know,
Yeah.
things like that, and those little, you know, tidbits and facts. So yeah, check that out. That's kind of where we're at. That's what we do.
Love it. No, this was great. A ton of information. I think we restructured this too. The episode, the foundations to run strong project financials. This was great. I
Yeah.
appreciate you, Nathan. We'll be in touch. Appreciate you jumping on the show.
All right. Take care.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.